Wooden roller coasters have been an American staple for over a century. These coasters are loved for their nostalgic feel and their rough but fun rides. However, some coasters are just too rough for any enjoyment. In the last decade, many solutions have come out to help fix rougher wooden coasters. There's always been the classic retracking, and now there's the newer RMC iBox track model that has become a staple in the industry. However, there is now a bridge between these two vastly different solutions, the GCI Titan Track. With the retrackings only built to fix small portions of coasters in the iBox track, built to do total layout makeovers, the Titan Track provides a middle ground between the two options. The Titan Track is mainly built to retract major portions of wooden coasters that have become very rough or to add inversions to existing coasters. The Titan Track can also be used to do full retracts, but for this video's purposes, we'll just say the Titan Track is built for partial retracts. This track has been tested on White Lightning at Fun Spot Orlando, so we've had a decent look at it. Today, we'll be taking a look at some of America's roughest wooden coasters and deciding if they should be retracked, given some Titan Track, or RMC'd. There's a lot of coasters that could potentially need some treatment, but that's all opinion based and can be subjective to what you personally would like to see happen to the ride. There's some coasters that some people would not want to see touched at all, which is completely fine. This is all for fun, so just keep that in mind. Before we hop into the video, make sure to like this video, as that is the best way to help out the channel and show me that you are enjoying my videos. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content on wooden coasters like this coming soon. I also want to let you guys know that I'm considering doing a part 2 to this video that would include more international coasters and some of the more obscure American coasters that I chose not to feature in this video. If you want to see that, make sure to like this video and leave me a comment so I know there's interest in it. Now, the way this video is going to work is that I'm first going to go over all the coasters that I think need to be RMC'd. Most of these coasters have weak layouts and are rough, so there's not much of a point of retracking these coasters. Next, we'll go over some coasters that are still rough but have decent layouts and could benefit from some Titan Track in certain spots. Finally, I'll go over some coasters that I think could use a touch-up with a simple retracking to smooth out some of the rougher spots. Before we get into our first section, I wanted to address what's happening with Predator. Predator was said to be getting the Titan Track this offseason by Claire Hain. However, we've heard nothing since and no progress has been made to my knowledge. I recently posted an update about this, so make sure to go check that out. I'll put it in the iBox for you guys to go check out right now. With all that being said, let's jump right into our first category. The first category of coasters we'll talk about is coasters that I believe should be RMC'd. Like I said earlier, most of these coasters that will be included in this section will be rough coasters with weak layouts. These coasters won't be helped out much by a small retracking or even a major rendition of the Titan Track. There's definitely an argument that some of these coasters that I'll place in the other category should be RMC'd, but I went with the most boring coasters for this category. If you have any disagreements on what I think should happen in these coasters, please share them with me in the comment section below. But without further ado, the first coaster I have in this category is Wild Beast at Canada's Wonderland. I had the opportunity to ride this coaster once in 2016, and it was actually fairly smooth because I was in the front row. I've heard the coasters can be really rough, but I haven't experienced it myself, so I don't know. However, this coaster has a boring layout and a pretty slow-paced ride experience, so it's really not worth that much in the grand scheme of things. I've heard that RMC is actually allowed to work in Canada, so if they could come up and do some work on this coaster, that would be great, and it would give Canada's Wonderland another powerful coaster to add onto their lineup. Making our way over to Quebec, we have Le Monster at La Ronde. This coaster is a dueling woody that doesn't really do anything in its layout, and has potential to be pretty rough from what I've heard. There's really no point in doing anything to this coaster other than RMC'ing it. This coaster always seems to be closed as well, so hopefully that would help increase the ride's availability if they are able to RMC it. Hopefully this would create a star attraction that La Ronde could really use. Heading down south, the Hurler at Carowinds. This coaster is another very boring, potentially rough wooden coaster that really has no purpose in the park's lineup. King's Dominion RMC'd their hurlers, so that could potentially be a barrier in RMC'ing this, but I don't really think Cedar Fair would care in the grand scheme of things. If this coaster were to get RMC'd and have a similar layout to Twisted Timbers, I don't really think anybody would complain. Next up, we have Cheetah at Wow Adventures. This coaster has recently announced to be closing permanently, so that obviously brought rumors of an RMC treatment potentially coming to this coaster. I think that could be a very real possibility, as this ride was known to be fairly rough and unenjoyable. This coaster would make for a great star attraction at the park and be a great new coaster, if Herschends decide to make the investment. Moving back up north, we have Wolverine Wildcat at Michigan's Adventure. This coaster is said to be insanely rough and unenjoyable, and there's already another great wooden coaster at this park with shivering timbers, so why not give it the RMC treatment? This would be a great addition to the park, even though Cedar Fair would likely never ever give this ride to the park. However, it would be a fun thing to see. Next up, we have Arkansas Twister at Magic Springs. This coaster is said to be a very rough and boring coaster, so there's really not much of a point in keeping this thing around. So to me, RMCing that coaster sounds great because I put this very small park in the middle of nowhere on the map. Next up, we have Grizzly at California's Great America. This coaster is said to have one of the worst layouts out of any coaster ever. This coaster isn't said to be that rough, so doing anything else to it wouldn't really do much good, so the RMC treatment seems like the only viable option. California's Great America already has a really good wooden coaster with Gold Striker, which we'll get to later, so there's absolutely no value in keeping this coaster around, so give it the RMC treatment. Finally, we have Wildcat at Lake Compounds. This coaster is really old. It's said to give a really poor ride experience and isn't really much fun at all, and it just recently got new trains that are said to make the ride even worse. I highly doubt a coaster this old would get RMC'd, but it definitely looks like the best option at this point. I don't really think anything else will do it much good. Next up, we'll be talking about some coasters that are rough but have good layouts and could possibly be fixed by some Titan track. The first coaster featured on this list is Mighty Canadian Mindbuster at Canada's Wonderland. This coaster has been nicknamed the Spinebuster for its roughness, but Mindbuster probably has the better layout compared to Wild Beast. That's why I chose to put it on this list, because I couldn't see two RMCs going to the same park. I thought this coaster had an okay layout when I wrote it, but I did think it was fairly rough, so some Titan track might do a little bit to fix it up. Thunderhawk at Dorney Park is another coaster I think that could benefit from some Titan track. This coaster is kind of in the same boat as Wildcat at Lake Compounds, but I think this coaster has some decent moments and could be helped out by the Titan track, but I don't really know with this ride. When I wrote it, I thought it was kind of rough, but I wasn't really that much of a hater of it, so I think it could benefit from the RMC treatment as well, because I'm not a big fan of the layout either. So as long as I do something to the ride, I'd be happy with that. Wildcat at Hershey Park is another prime candidate for the GCI Titan track. This coaster was GCI's first coaster, and when I rode it this past summer, I actually found it to be fairly enjoyable and it had a decent layout and gave some decent airtime. However, there are some rough patches on the ride that I think could benefit from some Titan track, and it can make it a really good coaster if it is given proper treatment, so I think it could work really well for this ride. Next up, we have Roar at Six Flags America. I personally have not ridden this coaster, but I've heard it to be rough with an okay layout. I think the layout is good enough to keep around, and I think they could give this some Titan track to really fix the ride up. I know many people are wishing for this to get the RMC treatment like its counterpart at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, but I think it has some potential in it. So let's slap some Titan track on it and we'll see how it does. Next up, we have Great American Scream Machine at Six Flags Over Georgia. This park already has an RMC, so it's automatically off the table, and I think this coaster has a pretty good layout, and I've heard it actually has some really good airtime, so it wouldn't be worth RMCing anyways. But some people say this coaster is insanely rough, so I think some Titan track would definitely help with this coaster for the right price. Next up, we have Mindblower at Fun Spot Kissimmee. Mindblower is a really fun wooden coaster that's only a few years old, but it's really rough for some reason. This is already a really good coaster on its own, but the roughness takes away from the ride experience. If this coaster gets some Titan track, it could be in contention for one of the best coasters in Florida. Next up, we have Legend at Holiday World. This coaster is said to have a pretty good layout, but it has some rough spots that takes away from the ride experience. I think the Titan track could greatly help this coaster out. Apparently, GCI is already retracking this ride, so that'll be good as well. Next up, we have American Eagle at Six Flags Great America. This coaster is an older dueling coaster that is said to have some rough patches. This coaster could benefit from some Titan track to help smooth out those rough patches and maybe some new trains to make the ride experience a little more comfortable. I feel like an RMC treatment might be off the table because Goliath is fairly similar to what that would look like, so it kind of be redundant. Next up, we have Boss at Six Flags St. Louis. Boss is said to be a solid coaster with a solid layout, but it has some rough spots that kind of kill the ride. I think maybe potentially adding an inversion with the Titan track and maybe smoothing out some of those rough spots can make Boss a really good coaster. Next up, we have the New Mexico Rattler at Cliffs Amusement Park. This ride is said to be fairly fun, but it also has some rough patches that can kind of hurt the ride experience a bit. I think adding some Titan track to the ride would really help it out. Smoothing out some of the rough spots, give this coaster a boost and keep the CCI running for a long time. Finally, we have Timberwolf at Worlds of Fun. This coaster has already gotten some major retrackings and renovations to its layout made. I've heard this ride's actually a pretty good coaster now, but from what I can see, the Titan track could be the cherry on top to making this coaster a really good coaster. This ride could provide a nice complement to Prowler with some Titan track and possibly a new inversion added onto the coaster. Next up, we're going to be talking about some coasters that I think should be retracked and nothing more. First up, we have Ravine Flyer 2. This coaster is very fun and it's actually in my top 25. However, it is a bit rough in some areas. This coaster really isn't that old, and I think it needs just a little bit of TLC to keep it going in tip-top shape. RMC shouldn't come anywhere near this coaster, and maybe GCI could help it out with the Titan track, but I like it to stay a wood coaster. Next up, we have Thunderbolt at Kennywood. This coaster is a classic. It was actually redone from being called the Pippin a long while back. From the rides I had on it, it was fairly rough, but nothing unbearable, and it still felt like a fun classic. For that reason, I wouldn't like to see any steel on this coaster anywhere, to be honest. Next up, we have Great White at Morty's Piers. This coaster is actually getting retracking already, so that's awesome, but I think this one could really go either way with a Titan track or typical retrack. I got one ride on this coaster over 5 years ago, and I remember it being fairly smooth and a couple of rough patches, but nothing too unbearable, so I think a typical retracking will work to keep that classic wooden coaster on the boardwalk feel. Next up, we have Grizzly at King's Dominion. This park already has an RMC, so there's no point in doing that, and there's really not much of a point putting any Titan track on it either. The coaster is fairly rough, but I think a good retracking would help it out a bit. But overall, there's not a whole lot that can really do with this coaster. With a similar situation, next up we have Thunder Run at Kentucky Kingdom. This park already has an RMC as well, so that's obviously not an option. I think a Titan track redo could be possible. That's a little bit redundant, but I don't really think it'd matter too much. A normal retrack for this coaster would be completely fine in my opinion. They'll probably just have to deal with this coaster the way it is because the park doesn't have that many coasters right now. But overall, there's really not a whole lot they can do with this ride either. Next up is Racer at Kings Island. This coaster is already getting a retracking, so that is awesome. I've heard complaints about this coaster being fairly rough, but I don't think Kings Island adds steel to such a nostalgic attraction, and I would completely agree with that. There's not much of a reason to do anything but a retracking on this coaster. Next up, we have another wooden coaster at Kings Island, and that is the Beast, and without a doubt, we are not going to be rooting for any kind of steel treatment to happen in this coaster. A nice little retrack will be fine, but other than that, we don't really want this ride being touched. Next up, we have Raven at Holiday World. I've heard this coaster has a really good layout, but unfortunately I heard it beats you up a bit and can be a bit rough in certain patches of the ride. I'd say a little TLC and some retracking could really help this coaster out, but Holiday World already gives this coaster a lot of TLC, so maybe it does need the Titan track, I don't know, but for now, I'd just say a simple retrack would be fine. Next up, we have Boulder Dash at Lake Compounds. This coaster has won the Golden Ticket Awards for being the best wooden coaster in the world before, and I've heard it has some great qualities that makes it deserving of that title. However, I've heard it became a bit rough over the past few years. A retracking would definitely help this coaster out. I'm not really sure if Titan track would really be the best fit for this ride, especially since it prides itself on being a wooden coaster that wins wooden coaster awards. So yeah, give me a retrack for this one. Next up, we have Gold Striker at California's Great America. This coaster is said to be one of the best GCIs, however, I have heard that it has been getting a little bit rough over the past few years, so maybe some retracking would help this coaster out. I personally don't want to see newer wooden coasters getting Titan track, and Gold Striker falls under that category, so give me a simple retrack with this ride. Next up, we have Judge Roy's Scream at Six Flags Over Texas. This coaster is a bit on the older side, and I've heard it's become a bit rougher over the years, but I think a simple retracking would do. And finally, we have Tremors at Silverwood. This coaster has already had some topper track installed by RMC, so I don't really see any other company working on it besides RMC, so I think they probably will get more upgrades from them if they get any at all in the future. So that's my plan for fixing North America's major wooden coasters. I think there's many coasters that just need some minor adjustments to become really good rides. Not every coaster needs something drastic as a full RMC redo. I like the idea of the Titan track because now there are so many options for wooden coasters that need some love. The different levels of treatments are definitely great options to have. If I forgot any coasters on this list, make sure to tell me them in the comments below so I can include them in a potential part 2. I also would like you guys to tell me any disagreements you have with the placements of these coasters in the comments below as well, so I can know your opinion. Also, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, help ensure a part 2 is made, as that is what I'll base making that on. But I really appreciate you guys making it to this point in the video. I hope you enjoyed and want a part 2. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.